Hello, happy campers. Welcome back to the Blemings Lab. Very delighted to introduce our next talk. So Mike Jang will be talking to us about UI text. Simplicity is difficult. This talk is actually a pre-recorded talk. It goes for about 40 minutes, after which we'll be doing some live questions with Mike. He's in the Venulus chat, and then we'll be joining me in the studio to talk to you live with some of your questions. So please post your questions to the Venulus channel, Blemings Labs channel, and we'll be moderating them through. So Mike is a senior technical writer for GitLab, where he documents how deployers can manage their DevOps flows. To figure out what to write, Mike spends much of his time analyzing and testing new software. He also helps with the Write the Docs meetup team. Write the Docs is a global community of people who care about software documentation. With 45 meetups in 11 different time zones, Mike has focused on documenting best practices and helping meetup leaders help each other. Mike's written a couple dozen technical books, including multiple editions of the RHCSA, RHCE Red Hat Linux Certification Study Guide. He's also the author of O'Reilly's Linux Annoyances for Geeks. Welcome, Mike, and I'll hand over to the pre-record.
Hi, I'm Mike Jang, and welcome to our session on UI text. The goal with UI text is simplicity, but getting there can be a pain. Since I'm pre-recording this, and my recording software doesn't pick up my camera, here's my image. The art of getting to simplicity in UI text requires an in-depth knowledge of your product and a willingness to leave out edge cases. Online, simplicity in UI text is also known as microcopy. Several years ago, when I worked for a company called ForgeRock, we decided to enhance functionality in our UI. That's when I started looking critically at the text we had in our UI, and I saw this. I looked at it, and I thought, what does this remind me of? And then it hit me. It looked like the blue screen of death. I thought, I have to fix this. This talk is my story, my lessons learned. I share it in the hope that you can learn from what I've done. When I've given older versions of this talk in person, I asked people to stand up when I called out what they do. Maybe I'll do something similar here, especially since many of us are now sitting at desks and may have been sitting for hours. So take a moment to stretch or stand up and think about the variety of people who have input on UI text. People like writers, UI designers, developers, product managers, testers, and more. A little bit about myself. I'm a senior tech writer for a company called GitLab, and we say that it's a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And as you've already seen, I also include examples from my previous job at an identity management company called ForgeRock, where I first learned to deal with UI text. A bit more on my background. Since this is a Linux conference after all, I'm going to say I've written a few books on Linux. These two are two of the most prominent anyways. And yes, I'm a Red Hat certified engineer. And that means I'm certifiable. Certifiably crazy for text configuration files. I showed this file to a group of UI designers once. They rolled their eyes. This file is from Apache, the web server, and it contains all the info you need to set up a basic virtual host on a web server. So why did I get into graphical UIs? In this screen, on the left we have a JSON file. On the right, we see the UI representation as such. Lots of people don't have time for text configuration files. They want to get their jobs done. And besides, many people prefer UIs because they sell. But seriously though, there are other advantages to text configuration files. So let me ask, since this is pre-recorded with a short pause, which do you prefer? In a talk like this, you'd think I'd prefer the UI, but the real answer is both. There's a need for both, and there's a use for both. There's a place for UIs as well as for text interfaces. In any case, people have been looking for good UIs for decades. This screenshot is from a UI developed at Xerox PARC from about the time I was born, and if you remember my image, that was a few years ago. I have a mantra, a slogan if you will, for UI text, and that's make every word earn its place. You want to keep UI text to an absolute minimum, but you want to provide enough information to help users do their jobs. When I started working UI text, I started seeing bad UI text everywhere. And I'm sure you've seen it too, on billboards, on street signs, airplanes, and more. Now for a few of my favorites. If you have to go to the bathroom, you think you know how to lock the door, but maybe not in the UK. A friend shared this picture from a UK train bathroom, and it includes a whole procedure. If you need to go, do you want to read a procedure first? Imagine you've flown all the way to Burma. Some people call it Myanmar. You're jet-lagged. You've checked into your hotel. You're in room 713. So next thing you do is you look for the 7th floor and you think, where is it? You're back from Burma. You've filled out some crazy complex expense report. You've finally gotten approval, and you see this. Extracted for payment. At least in the US, extracted is something that's done at the dentist. Yeah, I know, extracted is also a normal database term, but extraction also makes me think of Guantanamo Bay, the US military prison, and that's not the image you want with an expense report. Now here's a road sign in Wales. I call this useless UI text. You're speeding down the highway, you see this sign, and you're thinking, what's this? Arwood Seeker? I probably pronounced that really wrong, but then you hit traffic. In this case, useless UI text can be dangerous. One more category. You're looking for parking. You see this set of signs. You're thinking, can I park here? If you stop or even slow down to look, someone behind you is bound to get on their horn. Of course you'll be honked well before you figure out what these signs actually say. Here's my personal award for the worst UI text ever. For me, it's even worse than the blue screen of death. We saw it back in January of 2018 in Hawaii. It's a story that breaks my heart. This UI screen is from the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. Imagine you're a government official in that agency. You have this on your smartphone. Someone tells you to send out an Amber Alert, a road closure notice, whatever. And you make a mistake and select PACOM. What is PACOM? That's the Pacific Command of the U.S. military. And when somebody clicked the wrong link, that action sent out this message to everyone in Hawaii on their mobile devices. UI text is important. Now that I've made the point, how do we make things better? I've subdivided my lessons into 10 steps to better UI text. If you really want to work with UI text, you need to know your product. If you don't, you're making stuff up. And that does nobody any good. As a documentarian, a tech writer if you will, I have a personal mission. I want everything that I write to include a complete, accurate depiction of functionality. Yes, to create excellent UI text, I gotta know my product. And you'd think you'd want a complete, accurate depiction of functionality. But where does that lead? Yes, for a product that I used to work on, this is the result. Or it was the result. And you see something similar 15 times in the info pop-ups. Seriously? How many admins, or even expert users, well, let's call them the same thing, are going to read every info pop-up, especially when they all look like this? What made this text worse from my point of view is that the help text was straight from the documentation. The UI designer thought he was doing something sensible. He read the docs, he took the right excerpt, and included it as help text. But seriously, very few people can handle these walls of text, even though it's text that you might see in a text configuration file. So what do you want with UI text? Accurate text, yes, which means you must know your product, but you want just enough text to help users do their jobs. Now, if you're trying to help users do their jobs, you want to take the point of view of a user. And what do users want from their UIs? Many of them will tell you, "Don't make me think." And when they say that, you might recognize this book. If you're a UI designer or developer, you probably know it. It's sort of seminal in the art of UIs. At GitLab, these kinds of principles work for us, as the writers are part of the user experience team. Back to our examples of bad UI text and the road sign that made the user think. Well, sometimes you should make your users think. This is a road sign from near a bridge in Georgia. Imagine you're in a US semi, which in Australia I gather is called a road train. In either case, think if you're driving down the road and you hear the top of your cab hit this sign, you're going to start thinking. And if you're rational, you might just stop. The lesson here: there are always exceptions to rules in UI text. If you don't stop, courtesy of the sign, you know there are consequences. The town that put up the sign was tired of rescuing trucks that got stuck under that bridge. So if you have to make the user think, you want that message to be as simple as possible. To do so, I suggest that you limit that text to one easy breath. If you go beyond that breath, you're going to stress out your users, and that is not Zen. I mean, seriously, can you read this in one easy breath, or does it raise your blood pressure? Well, this is how it makes me feel. The picture is from Edvard Munch's The Scream. So, what can you get into one easy breath? I suggest two thoughts, maybe even a cause and an effect. Like the sign before the bridge in Georgia, cause and effect. If you hit this sign, cause, you will hit that bridge, effect. Even Microsoft learned this lesson. Look at the blue screen of death today. This is from Windows 7. It's a screen on the right. It has a cause, your PC ran into a problem, and an effect, it needs to restart. I'm a tech writer, but even I understand the purpose of UI text is to help people do their jobs without having to read the documentation. What's a good experience with a UI? That's a UI that's self-explanatory. If you have to explain the different options in a UI, if you have to refer to documentation to understand these options, well, I know several front-end developers who think of that as a failure. I presume all of you, or at least most of you here, have mobile phones or smart devices. How many of you have read a doc for how to use an app? Yeah, I know there are a few of you, but seriously, should you have to? These are products that should need no documentation. While some audiences expect to read docs, anytime your users have to read a doc, is that a failure in the UI? Those same front-end developers I referred to would say yes. Maybe that's unfair, but that's the expectation that's set by mobile apps. But complex UIs, they do need docs. Some products, even some UIs, have many moving parts. There are UI users who want to understand the complexity. Myself, today, I work with a complex UI. As we say, GitLab is a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. Almost by definition, that's complex. If you're working with a complicated product, you could very well be interested in docs. And as a tech writer, I certainly hope so. But you may need a hook, clickbait if you will, to motivate your users. For clickbait, I present two examples. One is an obvious question, something a user might ask. The other is a straightforward offer. Learn more. That's my favorite. It's simple, and it happens to be a complete sentence. If you're minimizing the need for docs using UI text, the text you use depends on your audience. When we work with UIs, we at GitLab have multiple personas. A whole raft of technically oriented users. For each of these personas, you can make assumptions about knowledge levels. Sometimes even the end user is technically oriented. Here's a UI screen that graphs pipelines. Does this make sense? Well, that depends on the audience. If you're a typical end user, you might see pipeline and wonder how we end up with over 1 million oil pipelines. Whereas if you know continuous integration, you know we're talking about deployment tests, a critical measure related to the quality of your code. Getting to UI text can be a journey. Everyone that thinks they know what should go into UI text, and to some extent, they're all correct. So if you're dealing with UI text, you'll feel the joy of negotiation. Before you negotiate, you should learn why your stakeholders are involved. The more you know about what your stakeholders want and need, the more influence you'll have on the final text. So who are these stakeholders? Well, here's the list from my point of view. I'll go through each. I see product managers involved in UI text as they are trying to push products that meet customer needs. And that happens with the WYSIWYGNess of the UI. They'll even mock up scenarios for how end users or administrators, etc., will use the UI. And with these scenarios, to paraphrase The Big Lebowski, Product designers use these scenarios to help bring the room together. Product designers, they take the story. They set up mock-ups and wireframes that are, in effect, the storyboard of what we think our customers want to do. They do it with style guides to keep things consistent throughout the UI. While designers create the story, it's the UI developers, the front-end engineers, who help the rubber meet the road. They code the wireframes so they work with the product. In some companies, it's the front-end developer who takes the first crack at UI text, based on what they know of the product and what they read in the documentation. A product that works only on the front end, well, I could set up a lot of nasty analogies, especially when a customer wants to throw a lot of data through the UI. Let's just say we need the back end to allow our users to take full advantage of our products. And back-end developers have their own perspective on what customers need to know. Your tester reviews the product to make sure the product, including the UI text, meets the requirements set out by the product manager as set up in stories and epics, and also that users can actually walk through the process. They'll look at your UI text with a critical eye. I suggest they can be the most rigorous testers of UI text. Who are these testers? They could be your internal quality engineers. They could be external A/B testers. Seriously though, they could be anyone who looks at your text and UI with a critical eye. If you're looking for a writer to create UI text, well, not every writer is good at it. You're looking for someone who writes with brevity. And for this, I think Hemingway, at his bomber peak, would have been a great UI writer. I mean, he wrote novels with only 6 words. Look it up, I swear. On the other hand, I think the ghost of Leo Tolstoy got hold of Microsoft when they created the original blue screen of death. With all of these stakeholders, implementation can be a labyrinth, a maze if you will. So let's get into some strategies for navigating this labyrinth. The straightforward strategy is to start with the easy stuff. So what is that low-hanging fruit? I put the low-hanging fruit into 3 categories: functional test, capitalization, voice, and tone. All stuff that you'll see in standard writing style guides. In a smaller company, I was able to work this alone, but with bigger UIs, how would you have the most impact? How would you distribute the effort? Well, writers are used to style guides, so with guidance, the contributions of one writer are as good as another. But the processes for committing to front-end code differ from committing to a docs-only Git repo. So how do you do it? How do you help the writer help your UI text? You set up templates with procedures. Here's the checklist we started just before the holidays. We have an ongoing effort to address text issues in selected sections of our UI. If you can read the text that I've shown here, you'll see that it's a checklist from our documentation and design style guides. The checklist goes further. It includes procedures for committing text to our front-end code. I won't go into details, as those procedures will vary as developers build products in different ways. Here's an example of the results. You'll see they're modest, but we are fixing the easy stuff. The first comparison, we've included the Oxford comma. That's the comma before the last item in a list. That comma here. The second, we've simplified the text. We wouldn't use max in our docs, but max is okay in the UI, as it's understood by our users. But remember, even the easy stuff isn't that easy. The first time I went after UI text in my old job, the diff was like 120 lines out of a 1200 line properties file. But when the QA in my previous job, yes, the tester, made comments like, "Mike, you're being inconsistent here," I thought, yes, I knew I had help. Here are comparable changes in my current job. Here we're modifying text directly in the code. Yes, I know it's a HAML file, but to a writer, it's code. With all of these stakeholders, you need to be flexible. What does that mean? What else can you do to keep things simple? Well, here are the guidelines I have in mind. Keep your text to a minimum. Don't be a grammarian. Incomplete sentences, and in some cases, incorrect grammar is okay. And here's one many love to hear. Don't apologize. But that's something suitable for US users. Maybe you should apologize more or less if your audience is from another culture. So that brings up a key assumption from my talk. I think audiences for software UIs expect text in US English. Of course, that's not always true, but I continue assuming US English as that's market-driven. I don't know if my choices make sense in Australian English. So as I say, your mileage may vary, of course. That's also an Americanism. Most of all, if you're creating or editing text, don't be this guy. Some of you might recognize him from the comedy known as Seinfeld as, let's just say, someone who demanded a lot from his customers. If you do that, you'll lose friends and nobody will care when you want to change UI text. In some cases, you can break the rules of grammar. Here's one. It's okay to end a sentence with a preposition as shown in the green box on the left. Take a moment to look. Which option is less awkward? Which do you prefer? Which one is grammatically correct? The option to the right technically is grammatically correct, but the option to the left, in my opinion, rolls off the tongue more easily and is what most people prefer. Here's a prime example where it's okay to split infinitives. What's an infinitive? The infinitive is the verb, in this case, to go. When you add the word boldly between these two words, you're splitting the infinitive. Imagine Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise talking about to go boldly where no one has yet gone. Does that roll off the tongue? Point being, it's okay to break some grammatical rules. End your sentences with prepositions. Split your infinitives. But to get to, well, let's call it accurate simplicity, you need to do your homework. You need to make sure the harder UI tests are readable and accurate. It's harder as you need to know your product in depth. Correcting spelling or grammar is not enough. Remember this help text? If you want people to use this help, you need something that people will actually read. For people who want to read the docs, we have a help link, but not everyone wants to read the docs. Here's an excerpt from the change I used to alter the walls of text. The difference seems straightforward enough, but this proposed change brought the most objections. I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised for a moment when the chief architect heard about my change and decided to make this comment. But I thought at least he would understand context. He objected. I thought I answered him, but then he was reinforced by the lead UI developer and then the program manager. They all said, "Mike, shouldn't you say source does not exist or is missing?" I knew I had to show them that I understood what I was saying. So I built our product from my proposed change and made my point. The context, in this case the title, already makes it clear that the source is missing. When I shared the screenshot, the approvals started coming in literally within minutes, and I thought, yes. Now in context, I had 15 info pop-ups. These are how 4 of the 15 messages looked before. When we updated our UI, it included my new help text. Now I'll show you the differences. These same 4 info pop-ups are now simpler. Messages that users might actually read. So now that you've built up this expertise, how do you scale? I've hinted at the process earlier in my step 8, start with the easy stuff. The key is a style guide, which means, at least in my old job, I needed to come up with some principles. When you create a style guide, you should research 2 things, audience and precedence. For audience at GitLab, we have several personas. When we set up issues for UIs and more, we specify the personas that we're working with. I had the privilege of setting up a UI text style guide at my previous company. If you create your own guide, there are excellent models available. I work with a living style guide at GitLab today, where the text guidance is integrated in the UI style guide. When you create a style guide, use examples from your products so your users, in this case, developers, designers, program managers, and so on, so they can relate. So if you need to create your own UI text style guide, here are my recommendations. Include examples that your developers can relate to. Include examples that work with specialized audiences. On the other hand, if you work with a general consumer audience, it's usually best to go with precedents expected by the general public. In most cases, UI text is part of a conversation between you, your UI, and your users. You should also consider accessibility. In general, you want text that works with screen readers. I've listed a few common issues, and it's a work in progress. For example, recently, Microsoft has started moving away from click in all of their UI text and their documentation. So what goes into a UI text style guide? I've listed what I've included here. Whoops, wrong direction. When you look at UI text, look at every word with a critical eye. Be sure to make every word earn its place. The newer Windows blue screen of death is better than it used to be, but we can look at this message with a critical eye. Your PC ran into a problem. Of course it couldn't handle it, so why include these words? And now it needs to, well, keep it simple. I'm sure some of you, probably most of you, are familiar with self-documenting code. They're descriptive names. You'd think they're good enough, but with such names, here's what you could end up with. You have a self-documenting name, and it doesn't precisely describe the purpose, so you end up with help text that looks like it conflicts with the self-documenting name. That can be a problem. Now here's sort of a bonus item. Messages. Strictly speaking, it isn't UI text, as you could just as easily see these words at the command line. So what do you do with such messages? Well, it depends. Here's some basics. When I talk about this one to people, they love it. When you apologize in a message, you're wasting your user's time, you're hurting your credibility. What do users want? They want for you, in your UI text, to get to the point. Of course, if it's a message caused by a software error, an apology of sorts is expected. Here's something that's unhelpful. When I tried setting up a all-auth client, that's authentication, I got this message. Later, I discovered that there was a real error message that actually helped, but it was embedded in the source for the web page. Why hide that information? There are exceptions. A couple of years ago, my wife and I arrived at Denver Airport. When we rode the trolley from the gates to the main terminal, we heard this over the speaker. "You are delaying the departure of this train." Perhaps that wouldn't work in all cultures, but in the American context, it made sense, with humor. Now time for a short exercise. I'll present a blob of UI text and two options. Think about what you'd prefer. If we were discussing live, I'd pause the talk and ask for your thoughts, but we can follow up during the question and answer period. My assumption, the text is in a mobile app. So now, here's the exercise. Shorten this statement to speed up your app. What would you replace this with? I present two options. Maybe you have a third or even a fourth option. So what's the right answer? Neither. Both. The lesson, as long as you have good options, don't be fussy. It's time for some conclusions. Be consistent, whether it's your terminology, your capitalization, punctuation, or grammar. Deviations create questions. And even worse, they make the user think. Speaking of help text, the one thing you absolutely want to avoid is setting up help text that looks like the blue screen of death. We've gone over this in some detail. If you remember my 10 principles, you'll ask yourself, can you read that in one easy breath? Context is one more element we learned about earlier. If you have context, you usually can reduce your UI text even further. Remember this example, how I settled a discussion in my previous job with the chief architect, UI lead, and program manager. So as a summary, here are my 10 steps to better UI text. And before I end this talk, I'm going to share some credits from people who've helped me. UI text is a cooperative enterprise. I've learned mounds from all of these people, and you can too. And with that, I say thank you very much. I pre-recorded this talk, and if I remembered my time zones, I'm right here and now ready for questions.
And welcome to the Q&A for Mike's talk. Mike, thanks so much for a great talk. That was really thought-provoking, I think, for a lot of people, and the chat was excellent. We've got a few questions from the audience and just a few minutes to go through, but from Donna, for smaller floss projects without UI or docs specialists, what are your top tips for devs to level up on their UI text in their products and services?
Well, I mean, for smaller projects, typically, and this isn't always true, typically there are precedents. I mean, you have a smaller project, it's because you're scratching an itch of a different project or piece of software that doesn't quite work for you. But with that different piece of software, you have precedents. They might say, click this button or select this item or have some sort of text. You can start with that and say, okay, is that something that'll help my user get the job done, ideally without creating document or having to read documentation?
Great, thank you. I guess another question as a follow-up to that then is, how do you balance, what are some methods that people can use to ensure not just great UI text up front, but then in a continuous way, and at what stage in the product lifecycle should you be considering and designing your UI text approach?
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd be able to road test or A/B test your UI text and watch your users actually go through your product to do a certain function. You'll see their reaction to UI text, and you'll know if it works or not. But that availability, that resource isn't always possible, especially in smaller companies. And in that case, you just have a lot of debates between all the kinds of players that I talked about, from program managers to quality engineers, and they'll all have their opinions, and you just have to compromise. You go with the best guess that you have as a collective whole.
Yeah, I guess when you're testing your UI text with actual end users, you're probably going to get quite different outcomes than from some of the product managers or developers or stakeholders. So is that kind of the key, to make sure you're actually testing your UI text with real end users of your text?
Yeah, I mean that's the ideal. I mean, you want to know that your UI text is actually helping the user do the function that you want. You're selling a product for the user to do something. Does your UI actually help them do it?
Wonderful. Do you think that there is how do you get that balance of UI text that can be reusable versus UI text that is specific? So when you're delivering a service sometimes, or a product, you might want to have some of your UI text in a content manager or something, so that you can reuse it in multiple different UIs. But obviously that makes it more generic. Like, is there any tips for how to balance that, or is reusable text just the way to madness?
I think it's the way to madness, but I understand it takes time to create custom things. So you just got to consider all the use cases.
Okay, wonderful. Do you have a favorite use case that you want to share with us about the best example? You gave us some really good examples of bad UI and some good UI. Any other last examples you want to leave us with to go and check out?
Well, I mean, there's this Reddit example about orphan processes and cookies, and I'll just give the punchline that you can look up. They actually put this in a UI. You have a checkbox that says "Kill orphans with cookies." I mean, from a technical point of view, it makes perfect sense, but is that what you really want to say in a UI?
No. So and on that happy note, I'll say a big thank you, Mike. That was an excellent presentation with some really good tips and thoughts for people. And thanks for sharing the slides in the group. For everyone, please, and Mike, if you wouldn't mind, there's the Blemings Labs post-talk Q&A channel on Venulus that people can follow up with any questions or with you there. So please, people, check that out. And coming up next after the very short room change break is Christopher Biggs talking about Linux and Zephyr. So I'll see a few of you after the break. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you.